Hello, brother. How was your day today? If possible, please let me know where you are on Earth. As for me, my day was quite boring. Let me share it with you. Today at school, I had a bit of a debate with my classmates on the following topics of controversial theories. The question here is the unexplained disappearance of the D.B. Cooper money, and I will share my personal views. Let's analyze it together. Imagine you are sitting in the quiet cabin of a Boeing 727 on the afternoon of November 24th, 1971. The hum of the engines blends with the murmur of distracted passengers. Suddenly, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses stands calmly, producing what appears to be a bomb strapped to his side. It's declaring a hijack and demanding a ransom of $200,000 in cash, along with 4 parachutes. You feel the tension spike instantly.
Ow.
This is no ordinary flight. The crew and passengers alike are gripped by an eerie certainty that the next several hours will alter their lives forever. And yet, after the man vanishes into dense Oregon forest under the cloak of night, only fragments of ransom money ever resurfaces, vanishing, as if swallowed by the very shadows he leaped into. After this video, you'll never look at the world the same way, for the tension gets too high. Take a moment to like the episode and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, prepare yourself, and let's unravel this hidden truth together. The calmness before the storm in aircraft hijackings rarely feels so surreal. The D.B. Cooper. Hijacking stands as a haunting snapshot from an era defined by deep societal tensions and emerging cultural distrust. The man who called himself Don Cooper, later mistakenly labeled as D.B. Cooper by media, exhibited an extraordinarily composed demeanor, employing precise demands and an evident knowledge of parachuting. His identity remains cloaked in mystery, challenging both law enforcement and public imagination for over 5 decades. What compels a man to execute such a meticulously planned crime and then vanish without a trace? The FBI's initial investigation escalated into one of their largest manhunts, forcing a nationwide reevaluation of airline security and psychological profiling. Yet within this grand sweep, the genuine nature of the event and the fate of the ransom money faded into obscurity. You are already on the precipice of a narrative that questions trust, identity, and human nature. How far can a person go when fueled by desperation, courage, or something far more complex? And should we seek to define Cooper by the crime alone, or embrace the enigmatic mystery as a mirror reflecting our own fears and fascination? But the real question remains, who was this man who vanished not just from the plane but from our grasp on truth? You are examining the small pool of facts available about the man known only as D.B. Cooper. Aware from the start that this puzzle defies conventional identification, the FBI learned very little about the hijacker's true identity. He gave a fake name, Dan Cooper, which was mistakenly recorded as D.B. Cooper by the press, thus forever framing the mystery. His physical description: a white male, mid-40s, 5 feet 10 to 6 feet 0, average build. Remarkably calm and polite throughout the ordeal, carried a briefcase that would come to be synonymous with daring mystery, but refused to allow anyone close, reinforcing an unsettling image of detachment. Despite a massive investigation, no confirmed identity emerged. The man left no fingerprints on the ransom money or clues in his parachuting gear, and no conclusive eyewitnesses reported seeing him after the jump. The FBI's suspect list grew wide, ranging from charming con men to military veterans with skydiving experience, yet all fell short of definitive proof. This loose assembly of suspects underscores a broader irony. The more we try to pin down Cooper, the more he slips away, transforming from a man into a ghostly cipher. When you think about it, the FBI's challenge was not simply catching a criminal, but unraveling an elusive persona carefully crafted to avoid detection. Whomever this person was, demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond amateur criminality, understanding aircraft operations, parachute types, and negotiation tactics with unnerving precision.
One could even argue
Cooper was orchestrating not just a hijacking but a psychological game that exposed law enforcement as blind spots. The bizarre twist lies in some reports from historical organizations with limited public records hinting at covert involvement. From unknown parties' possible shadows behind the scenes feeding misleading information or quietly monitoring the case, could Cooper have been a pawn or a ghost manipulated by larger forces? There are whispers of confidential groups with vested interests in keeping parts of the case veiled, although concrete proof remains frustratingly absent. But the real question remained: was Cooper a lone wolf genius or part of a hidden network? How much of his identity was ordinary man, and how much performance? Where the real battle is not one of physical force, but of psychological warfare. The air is thick with a tension you could cut with a knife. Through the intercom, the voice of the man calling himself Dan Cooper comes through not as a panicked shout, but as a calm, measured series of instructions. A negotiation where every word, every pause, is a strategic move on a chessboard 30,000 feet in the air. Cooper is not just a hijacker. He's a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of fear and compliance from a distance. His demands are unnervingly specific, revealing a mind that has rehearsed this moment countless times. The verifiable fact that defines this phase is his request for $200,000 in negotiable American currency and for parachutes, to primary and to reserve. You watch as the authorities on the ground scramble. The request for money is standard, but the demand for 4 parachutes is a stroke of manipulative genius. It immediately plants a seed of uncertainty in the minds of the FBI agents listening in. Does he have an accomplice on board? Is he planning to take a hostage with him? This single detail throws their protocols into disarray, forcing them to consider multiple scenarios and preventing them from formulating a simple, direct counter-strategy. It's a classic misdirection, a psychological feint designed to keep his opponents off balance. As you analyze his behavior, you realize Cooper is exploiting the fundamental principles of negotiation. Control the information, create ambiguity, and maintain the upper hand through composure. He is polite, even considerate to the flight attendants, a detail that further unnerves everyone involved. This isn't the erratic behavior of a desperate man. It's the calculated performance of someone who understands that true power lies not in overt aggression, but in quiet, unshakable confidence. He is turning the aircraft into his own isolated kingdom, with the flight crew as his unwilling subjects and the FBI as a distant, reactive court, like the infamous Cicada 3301 challenges that surface online. In those tests, anonymous entities issue a series of complex, almost arbitrary tasks, deciphering codes, following obscure clues to identify individuals with superior intellect and problem-solving skills. Cooper's demands feel similar in their strange precision. The instructions for the money delivery, a form of coded communication, a signal to an unseen network that he was executing the plan successfully. You can't help but wonder if this entire hijacking was a final exam. For a clandestine group that values audacity and intelligence above all else, the FBI, for their part, plays their role perfectly, adhering to the protocol of compliance to save lives. They gather the money, ensuring the serial numbers are recorded, a standard procedure that would later become a critical, yet ultimately frustrating, part of the investigation. You are back in the sky, but this time the atmosphere is heavier, thick with an unspoken finality. The Boeing 727, once a vessel carrying dozens of lives, is now a ghost ship sailing through a storm-tossed night. Below you, the rugged, unforgiving wilderness of the Pacific Northwest stretches out like a dark, sleeping beast. The passengers are safe on the ground, but you, along with the skeleton crew, remain trapped in this airborne theater of suspense. The man known as Cooper is no longer just a hijacker. He has become the sole master of this reality, his voice a disembodied calm that cuts through the drone of the engines. His final instructions are delivered with the same chilling precision that has characterized his every action. You hear the pilots confirm the orders. Maintain an altitude of 10,000 feet, keep the wing flaps lowered to 15 degrees, and fly with the landing gear down. When an ordinary person, these commands might seem random, but you immediately recognize the cold logic behind them. This is the verifiable historical fact that elevates the entire event from a simple crime to a display of expert knowledge. Flying in this configuration forces the aircraft into a slow, unstable state, approximately 170 knots, dangerously slow for a jetliner, but perfect for a parachute jump. It transforms the 727 from a high-speed projectile into a relatively stable platform from which to exit. Cooper has effectively turned a commercial airliner into his personal escape pod. He then directs the crew to do something unheard of: to lower the aft air stair, the retractable staircase at the rear of the plane. This feature, unique to the 711111, becomes his door into the void. As the hydraulic ramp descends, the cabin pressure explodes outward, and a deafening roar fills the space. A frigid, violent wind rips through the interior, a physical manifestation of the chaos he has so calmly unleashed. The temperature plummets, and the air becomes a maelstrom of freezing rain and turbulent currents. You feel the plane shudder, fighting to maintain its precarious balance. This is the point of no return. Through the chaos, you see a lone figure, silhouetted against the raging storm outside. He is laden with the money bag and the parachutes, a modern-day Icarus preparing for a flight, not toward the sun, but into absolute darkness. Around 8:13 p.m., somewhere between Seattle and Reno, he takes his final step. He doesn't hesitate. He simply walks to the edge of the ramp and lets the night swallow him whole. One moment he is there, a solid presence of calculated defiance. The next, he is gone, vanished into a black, churning abyss of trees, mountains, and freezing rain. You are left staring into the void where he once stood, and a chilling thought crystallizes in your mind. This was not just an escape. This was a ritual. The jump itself, this leap into a hostile, unknown environment. You are standing on the cold, wind-swept tarmac in Reno. The silence of the now empty Boeing 727 a stark contrast to the storm of activity erupting around you. The initial shock has worn off, replaced by the grim, methodical hum of a federal investigation kicking into high gear. The man is gone. The money's gone. The only things left are questions and a vast, hostile wilderness. The FBI's immediate response is not one of confusion, but of overwhelming force. This is no longer a negotiation. It is a declaration of war against an invisible enemy. The full weight of the U.S. government is about to be brought down on the forests of the Pacific Northwest. The investigation is immediately codenamed NORYEC, for Northwest Hijacking. This is the verifiable historical fact that signals the shift from a localized crisis to a sprawling national manhunt. The name itself, clinical and devoid of emotion, belies the frantic and often desperate reality of the search on the ground. You witness the mobilization of an army? Hundreds of soldiers from the Army's 101st Airborne and Special Forces units at Fort Lewis, Washington, are deployed, their expertise in parachuting and survival tactics deemed essential. They are joined by Air Force personnel, National Guard troops, county sheriffs, and local police departments. Helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft crisscross the sky, their searchlights cutting futilely through the dense canopy of pine and fir trees. On the ground, teams of searchers form long lines, moving shoulder to shoulder through miles of brutal terrain. They push through thick underbrush, navigate steep ravines, and cross icy rivers. The weather is their enemy, a constant barrage of freezing rain and snow that turns the forest into a treacherous maze. They are looking for anything: a discarded parachute, a scrap of clothing, a stray $20 bill, or a body. The official assumption, the most logical and comforting one, is that Cooper could not have survived the jump. The odds were astronomically against him. He leaped into a 200 mph windstorm at night with a non-steerable parachute, wearing only a business suit and loafers, into a rugged wilderness where temperatures were well below freezing. The search, therefore, is primarily a recovery mission. But as days stretch into weeks with no discovery, a creeping sense of unease begins to permeate the entire operation. The forest seems to swallow every effort, revealing nothing. This is where the investigation takes on a bizarre, almost mystical quality. Can't help but see the landscape itself as an unsolvable cipher. It reminds you of the arcane practice of steganography, the art of concealing a message within a seemingly innocent object. Secret organizations throughout history have used this technique, hiding codes in musical scores, paintings, or even the layout of a garden. Here, Cooper has done something similar on a monumental scale. He hasn't hidden a message in the wilderness. He has hidden himself, and the wilderness has become the final, unreadable page of his story. The searchers are not just looking for a man. They're trying to decipher a landscape, and they don't have the key. The initial theories formulated by the FBI are a desperate attempt to impose logic on. You feel the trail go cold. Years bleed into one another, turning the vibrant urgency of the Noriak investigation into a fading, archival memory. The forest has kept its secrets locked away. The manhunt, once a massive display of federal power, has been quietly scaled down, the case relegated to the back rooms of the FBI's Unsolved Files unit. Cooper has achieved what few ever have. He has successfully transitioned from a man into a myth, a ghost story told around campfires in the Pacific Northwest. The world has, for the most part, moved on. The case is a closed loop of speculation, a perfect circle with no entry point. Then, on a damp February afternoon in 1980, nearly a decade after the jump, the circle is broken. You are not in a sterile FBI lab or a smoky detective's office. You're on the sandy banks of the Columbia River at a place called Tennebar. You are seeing this through the eyes of an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram, who is on a picnic with his family. He is doing what any kid would do, digging in the sand. Clearing a spot for a bonfire, his mind on anything but a decade-old hijacking. His fingers brush against something soft and pulpy buried just beneath the surface. He pulls and unearths 3 decaying packets of cash bound by brittle rubber bands. This is it. The verifiable historical fact that reignites the entire mystery. The bundles contain $5,800 and $20 bills. And when the FBI gets their hands on them, they confirm the impossible. The serial numbers are a perfect match to the ransom money given to Dan Cooper. A jolt of electricity runs through the cold case. For the first time, there is tangible proof. The immediate logical conclusion rushes in to fill the vacuum of the last 9 years. He didn't make it. This must be the proof, the money theorists argue. Must have been carried by the river's currents from a point upstream, closer to the jump zone, where Cooper's body and the rest of his ill-gotten fortune lie undiscovered. It feels like a resolution, a sad but neat ending to the story. The audacious hijacker was claimed by the very wilderness he challenged. The money, his prize, rotted away, just like him.
Ow.
But you force yourself to pause and look closer.
No.
You resist the simple answer because, in this story, nothing is ever simple. The location, Tennebar, is problematic. It sits miles outside the most generous projections of Cooper's jump zone. Hydrologists are consulted, and their findings only muddy the waters. They create complex models of the river's flow patterns since 1971, but they can't agree. Some say it's plausible the money could have washed ashore there. Others insist it's a statistical impossibility. The discovery, meant to be an anchor of fact, becomes just another floating piece of debris in a sea of uncertainty. This is where the story pivots from a simple mystery to something far more intricate. The placement of the money feels too specific, too intentional. Doesn't feel like the random scatter of debris from a fatal fall. It feels like a dead. You are no longer looking at a simple criminal investigation. The discovery at Tennebar has peeled back a layer, revealing the potential for a far more complex architecture beneath the surface of the case. The idea that the money was a dead drop, a deliberate signal, forces your mind into the shadowy corridors of espionage and clandestine operations. If it was a message, who was it for? This question pulls you away from the lone wolf genius theory and toward a far more unsettling possibility, that Cooper was not the mastermind, but a highly skilled operative executing a plan designed by an unseen hand. You are now venturing into the realm of historical organizations with limited public records. These are not the cartoonish secret societies of popular fiction, but real, albeit hidden, networks that have operated in the peripheries of power for centuries. Their currency is not money, but influence, secrecy, and unflinching loyalty. The verifiable historical fact here is that the FBI themselves briefly entertained this line of inquiry. In the early days of Noriak, investigators considered the possibility that Cooper's expertise in parachuting and aviation might have come from a government agency like the CIA. His calm under pressure, his meticulous planning, and his ability to vanish were all hallmarks of a trained intelligence agent. The FBI quietly investigated several individuals with ties to the intelligence community, though these leads, like all the others, officially went nowhere. The mere existence of this inquiry, however, is a crack in the official narrative, an admission that Cooper's skills were far from ordinary. Now consider the bizarre operational philosophies of some of these historical groups. There are documented, albeit obscure, organizations whose entire ethos is built around the concept of egregore, a collective thought form, or group mind. To become part of the egregore, an individual must systematically erase their own identity. They are trained to detach from emotion, personal history, and even their own name. Anonymity is not just a tool for them. It is a spiritual state. Initiation rites for such groups often involve extreme acts of psychological and physical endurance designed to shatter the ego. You can almost picture Cooper's hijacking as the final public stage of such an initiation. The calm demeanor, the polite but firm control, the lack of any discernible personal motive. It's the perfect performance of a man who has ceased to be a person and has become an instrument. You examine the details through this new lens. The request for 4 parachutes wasn't just a tactic to confuse the FBI. It was a protocol, a step in a pre-written script. His leap into the stormy abyss wasn't a desperate gamble. It was the ultimate act of self-erasure, a literal and symbolic disappearance. He didn't just escape the law. He escaped himself. The money in this context becomes almost irrelevant, a mere prop in a much larger theatrical production. The real prize was the flawless execution of the act itself, a demonstration of the organization's reach and the perfection of its training methods. The group proves you are now stepping out of the tangible world of evidence, the money. The parachute, the flight pathed into the far more elusive and treacherous terrain of the human mind. You are a psychological profiler, tasked with constructing a portrait of a man from the ghost-like traces of his behavior. The subject is Dan Cooper. The evidence is not what he left behind, but how he acted, how he controlled not just a plane, but the emotional state of everyone around him. You are attempting to look behind the mask, but you begin to suspect the mask is all there is. Your analysis starts with the single most incongruous detail of the entire ordeal, a verifiable historical fact so mundane it becomes deeply bizarre. Shortly after revealing the bomb and taking control of the plane, Cooper flags down a flight attendant and does something utterly unexpected. He orders a bourbon and soda. When she brings it to him, he calmly insists on paying for it. He even tries to give her a tip. You let that sink in? A man in the middle of committing a federal crime, risking death and a life sentence, is concerned with the social niceties of settling his drink tab. This is not the behavior of a desperate criminal. This is a performance of normalcy so absolute it becomes terrifying. This single act is a psychological key. A typical hijacker, driven by rage, ideology, or desperation, operates in a heightened state of emotion. Their actions are jagged, their demands frantic. Cooper exists on a different plane entirely. His politeness is not a facade to calm the crew. It is an assertion of a different reality. In his reality, he is not a criminal. He is a customer, a passenger, a gentleman who pays his debts. By refusing to conform to the role of the violent aggressor, he forces everyone else into a state of profound cognitive dissonance. The crew is trained to handle a hostile threat, but they are not trained to handle a polite one. His calm is a weapon, disarming them more effectively than any overt threat could. You are witnessing a masterclass in psychological control. This profile doesn't fit neatly into any standard criminal category. He is not the typical narcissist who needs to boast or grandstand. He remains anonymous. He's not the classic psychopath who enjoys inflicting cruelty. He is consistently described as thoughtful and gentlemanly. So what is he? You're looking at a personality so compartmentalized, so detached from its own actions, that it can exist in 2 realities at once. He is simultaneously the hijacker holding a city for ransom and a man quietly enjoying a drink. This level of detachment brings to mind the bizarre, esoteric concept of the tulpa, a being or object created through sheer force of will and mental discipline. As described in certain mystical texts from historical organizations, adepts are said to be able to create a fully formed, autonomous consciousness that can act independently in the world, a living mask. You wonder if Don Cooper was something like, you are no longer a psychologist trying to understand a man. You are a cryptanalyst trying to decipher a language. You've concluded that Cooper's actions were a performance, a meticulously constructed reality. Now you must consider the most chilling possibility of all, that his words and demands were not just instructions, but a form of hidden communication. You begin to search for a cipher, a code embedded within the very fabric of the hijacking, suspecting that the most important messages were not the ones spoken aloud. To the crew, but the ones transmitted silently to an unseen audience. Your investigation starts with the most obvious and yet most overlooked clue: the name he chose. The verifiable historical fact is that the alias Dan Cooper was the name of a French-Canadian comic book hero. In the comic series, Dan Cooper is a Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot, an expert parachutist, and a man involved in countless adventures in the sky. When the FBI discovered this, they treated it as a piece of biographical trivia, a simple clue to the hijacker's potential interests or background. They assumed he was a fan, that he plucked the name from a piece of popular culture he enjoyed. It was dismissed as a shallow, almost childish choice for an alias. But you see something different? You see a key. You are suddenly plunged into the arcane world of steganography and book ciphers, one of the oldest and most effective forms of secret communication. This is where you find the bizarre, quirky detail that shifts your entire perspective. For centuries, spies and historical organizations with limited public records have used a simple, unbreakable method: the book cipher. Two individuals agree on a specific book, a specific edition. A message is then encoded using a series of numbers that correspond to a page, a line, and a word within that book. For example, the code 1547 might mean page 15, line 4, word 7. Without the key, the exact book, the code is just a meaningless string of numbers. The beauty of it is its simplicity and its security. The key is not a complex algorithm. It is a mundane object hidden in plain sight. Could the Dan Cooper comic book be the key? You realize the FBI made a critical error in judgment. They saw the comic as the source of the name when it may have been the purpose of it. By stating his name was Dan Cooper, the hijacker wasn't just giving an alias. He was signaling to his Confederates which key to use for deciphering the real message. Suddenly, all of his seemingly arbitrary demands take on a terrifying new logic. This theory transforms your understanding of the event. Cooper is no longer just a hijacker. He is a courier, a living radio antenna. The money is not the goal. It is part of the message's camouflage. He is performing for two audiences simultaneously. For the public and the FBI, he is a daring criminal. But for a hidden audience, the one holding a matching copy of a French-Canadian comic, you are now in a dimly lit room, hunched over a series of aeronautical charts that map the Pacific Northwest. The official flight path of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 after it departed from Seattle is laid out before you. It's a simple, clean line drawn in red ink. It looks deceptively straightforward. The plane took off, headed south, and somewhere along that vector a man jumped out. The simplicity of it feels wrong, like a child's drawing of a complex event. You know from the previous threads of this mystery that every simple detail in this case is a potential hiding place for a complex truth. The flight path is not just a route. It is a statement, and you are determined to understand what it's saying. The pilots sequestered in the cockpit and flying blind to the events in the cabin were following Cooper's explicit instructions. This is where you find the next verifiable historical fact. They were ordered to fly on Victor 23, specific low-altitude federal airway that stretches south from Seattle toward Oregon. They were to maintain 10,000 feet with flaps and gear down. On the surface, this instruction reinforces the profile of a man with specialized knowledge. Victor 23 would have taken him over sparsely populated, forested terrain, perfect for a clandestine jump. His instructions created a flight profile that made a parachute escape survivable, if incredibly risky. The FBI and the FAA took this data and used it to calculate the most probable jump zone, a roughly defined patch of wilderness in southwestern Washington. The entire logic of the subsequent manhunt was built upon the foundation of this single red line on your chart. But you are a skeptic. You understand that in a game of deception, the most effective lies are the ones that are mostly true. What if the flight path itself was the final act of misdirection? The pilots were prisoners in their own cockpit. They could follow their instruments. They could maintain the heading they were given. But they could only report what they believed to be true. Their perception was a hostage, just like their aircraft. Could Cooper have introduced a subtle variable they didn't account for? Could he have instructed a slight, momentary deviation that, when extrapolated over distance and time, would shift the jump zone by miles? A small turn, a slight change in airspeed held for only a minute, any tiny anomaly would be enough too. poison the well of data from which the entire search was drawing. This is when you pull your focus away from the esoteric maps of invisible energy and back to the cold, hard evidence of the physical world. If Cooper wasn't navigating by ley lines, then he was a man of flesh and blood, a man with a history, a name, and a face. You are now sitting in the heart of the investigation, surrounded by stacks of files that represent decades of dead ends. You are poring over the FBI's suspect list, a sprawling document containing over 1,000 names. This list is not a path to the truth. It is a gallery of ghosts, a collection of mirrors where every investigator, every amateur sleuth, saw the reflection of their own pet theory. It is a testament to the human desire to put a face to a phantom. Each file tells a story, a potential solution to the puzzle. You pick one up, and it's for Richard McCoy Jr., a Vietnam veteran and skydiving enthusiast, who, just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, pulled off a remarkably similar crime. He hijacked a plane, demanded a ransom, and parachuted into the night. It feels too perfect a mirror image. The FBI caught McCoy, but he always maintained his innocence in the Cooper case. And the Bureau officially ruled him out, citing key differences in their physical descriptions and methods. Yet, for many, the parallel is too strong to ignore. You pause, analyzing the psychological implication. Is McCoy the proof that Cooper was not a unique mastermind, but simply the first to succeed at a replicable formula? Or is the public's insistence on connecting the two a sign of our need for patterns, for a sequel to a story that never had a proper ending? You set that file aside and pick up another, this one containing a more modern and media-savvy suspect, Robert Rackstraw. Here's the man who seems tailor-made for the role of D.B. Cooper. A decorated paratrooper, an explosives expert with a history of daring and a cryptic, almost playful relationship with the accusation. He had the skills, the physical profile, and a background shrouded in enough mystery to make him a compelling candidate. A team of private investigators championed him as the true Cooper for years. The FBI, however, looked into Rackstraw multiple times, and like with McCoy, definitively cleared him. Yet Rackstraw embodies the elusive mastermind archetype that so many want to believe in. He is the Hollywood version of Cooper, the rogue soldier with a grudge. You realize that our fascination with a suspect like Rackstraw isn't just about the evidence, it's about the kind of story we want this to be. We crave a narrative of a brilliant, rebellious individual, not a random, lucky criminal. This is when you shift your focus from the gallery of human suspects to the silent, inanimate heart of the crime, the ransom. It is a physical object, a block of reality in a story that has become increasingly ethereal, can feel its conceptual weight, $200,000, which in 1971 was a substantial fortune, equivalent to over $1 million today. It consisted of 10,000 individual $20 bills. Unlike the man who took it, this money is not a phantom. It has substance. It has serial numbers. And in those numbers, the FBI believed they had laid the perfect trap. Here you encounter the foundational, verifiable, historical fact upon which the entire financial investigation was built. Before delivering the ransom, the FBI meticulously recorded the serial number of every single bill. They created a complete microfilm record of all 10,000 serial numbers. This list was then distributed to every conceivable financial institution, law enforcement agency, and major casino across the country, and eventually the world. It was a digital web laid across the global financial system. The logic was flawless and ironclad. The money was now radioactive. To spend a single one of these bills would be to trip an invisible wire, to send up a flare that would instantly pinpoint the spender's location. The FBI was confident that even if Cooper survived the jump, he was now a prisoner of his own success. He was a rich man who couldn't buy a cup of coffee. This fact provides the simplest and most compelling argument for Cooper's death. If he had survived, surely at least a few of these bills would have surfaced over the years, passed by accident or by desperate necessity. But with the exception of the small, decayed bundle found at Tenabar, the remaining $194,200 has never been seen again. Not a single bill has ever appeared in circulation. The logical conclusion is that the money, along with the man, lies at the bottom of a ravine or buried under forest debris, slowly decomposing back into the earth. The trap was perfect, but it never had a chance to spring because the target was already gone. It's a neat, tidy explanation that satisfies the rational mind. But you have learned by now to be suspicious of neat, tidy explanations in this case. You feel a familiar sense of intellectual resistance. It feels too convenient. You are forced to consider the alternative. What if the money was never meant to be spent? You are now deep within the belly of the beast. Not in a forest, but in an archive, surrounded by the mechanical soul of the hijacking. The air smells of old paper and ozone from a microfilm reader. Before you are not witness statements or psychological profiles, but the cold, hard guts of the machine itself, maintenance logs, engineering schematics, and flight data recorder printouts for Northwest Orient's Boeing 727. Registration number N467US. You believe that if a lie was told, its echo might be found here, in the objective, unbiased memory of steel and wire. You are looking for a ghost in the machine. Your eyes land on a technical directive issued by the FAA in the months following the hijacking. It is a modification order for all Boeing 727 aircraft. The device it describes is simple, almost elegant, a small, spring-loaded weather vane attached to the fuselage near the aft air stair. When the aircraft is in flight, the airflow pushes this vane, which in turn engages a latch that physically prevents the staircase from being lowered. The device has a name, an unofficial but universally recognized moniker that is, in itself, a monument to the mystery. It is called the Cooper vane. This is your verifiable historical fact, an admission of defeat cast in metal and bolted to thousands of airplanes. It is the system acknowledging that it could not catch the man, so it had to redesign its own body to prevent his ghost from ever appearing again. He left a physical scar on the entire aviation industry. This physical legacy of fear gives the FBI's own data a false sense of security. You turn your attention to the flight data recorder, the black box that served as the primary witness to Cooper's final moments. On the spidery lines of the printout, investigators found what they believed was the definitive clue. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's instruments registered a sudden, momentary upward movement of the tail section, a slight bounce, a bump in the data stream. To the FBI, the interpretation was obvious and absolute. This was the moment Cooper, a man of roughly 180 pounds, stepped off the stairs. His weight leaving the ramp caused the tail to bob up like a canoe reacting to a passenger disembarking. This single data point became the cornerstone of their entire search grid. They took this bump as gospel, used it to pinpoint the jump location, and focused their massive manhunt on the patch of wood. You turn away from the cold mechanics of the plane, from the phantom signals in the flight recorder, and the silent metal scar of the Cooper vane. The machine has told you all it can. Now, you must turn to the human network, the sprawling, chaotic system of whispers, rumors, and secrets that grew around the case like a parasitic vine. You are stepping into the world of the informant, the anonymous caller, the shadowy figure who claims to know the truth. You are about to discover that in a mystery this deep, a helping hand can look exactly like a blade in the back. Your journey begins with an act of institutional transparency that feels more like an act of surrender. You are sitting with the consequence of this decades-long silence, the publicly released Noriek files. Made available through the Freedom of Information Act. This is your verifiable historical fact. The moment the government was forced to open its secret book, but the book is not a clean text. It is a nightmare of redaction. You flip through thousands of pages, and on every page, thick black bars slash across names, dates, and entire paragraphs. These redactions are not just missing information. They are a presence. They are loud absences, black holes of data that scream of secrets being kept. They are the official, government-sanctioned whispers. These files reveal that from day one, the FBI was inundated with tips. Thousands of calls, letters, and deathbed confessions poured in. The Bureau found itself drowning in a sea of information. Most of it useless, some of it bizarre, and a tiny fraction of it tantalizingly plausible. They were looking for a signal in an ocean of noise. But you begin to suspect that the noise was not accidental. It was a weapon. Sheer volume of false leads was a form of psychological warfare, a denial-of-service attack on the investigative process itself. It drained resources, frayed nerves, and created a pervasive atmosphere of paranoia. Every agent had to wonder, is this caller a concerned citizen, a crank, or an enemy combatant deliberately feeding us poison? This calculated chaos reminds you of a bizarre and terrifying historical precedent: the secret tribunals of medieval Germany. The Vimgort. You retreat from the disorienting hall of mirrors, from the whispers and the redacted files. The human element has become too compromised, too polluted with noise and deception. Need something clean, something objective. Return to the pure, cold logic of science. You are in a modern forensic laboratory, a place where the ghosts of the past can be made to speak through the language of molecules and data. You are looking for a definitive answer, a single, irrefutable piece of physical evidence that can cut through the fog of myth and speculation. The primary artifact of your investigation is the black clip-on tie Cooper left behind on seat 180. For decades, it was just another piece of the puzzle, a mundane object that held no apparent clues. But in the early 2000s, a team of citizen scientists, independent of the FBI, was granted access to it. This is where you find your next verifiable historical fact. Using a powerful electron microscope, they conducted a detailed analysis of the tie's surface. What they found was astonishing. The tie was a microscopic archive, a veritable magnet for the environmental particles it had come into contact with. They identified thousands of particles, but a few stood out: rare earth elements like cerium and strontium sulfide, as well as pure, unalloyed titanium. At first glance, this is a breakthrough. These are not common materials. In 1971, pure titanium was an exotic metal, primarily used in high-tech industries. The rare earth elements were even more specialized, used in niche applications like CRT, screen phosphors, or advanced optics. The profile suggested Cooper worked in a very specific environment, a high-end metal fabrication plant, an aerospace facility, or perhaps even a chemical company that manufactured these materials. The science had seemingly narrowed the search from 1,000,000 possibilities to a handful of specialized professions. It was a moment of incredible hope, a feeling that technology could finally succeed where traditional detective work had failed. The tie, it seemed, was about to betray its owner. But as you look closer, the hope begins to curdle. The sheer diversity of the particles is, in itself, a problem. The tie also contained traces of things like spiral diatoms, which are found in water, and spores from a specific type of fungus. The profile wasn't of a single clean environment. It was a chaotic mixture of a dozen different places. You step back from the microscope, leaving the paradoxical dust of the tie behind. The search for a physical man has led you to a dead end, a forensic hall of mirrors. You realize that while the FBI was hunting for a person, the world was busy building a god. You are no longer an investigator in a criminal case. You are a cultural anthropologist observing the birth of a modern myth. You must now analyze the most successful and enduring part of Cooper's escape, his disappearance into the realm of folklore. The hijacking was a crime that lasted only a few hours, but the story it created is immortal. It has become one of America's great unsolved mysteries. A piece of folklore as potent as the legend of Billy the Kid or the lost treasure of Blackbeard. The name D.B. Cooper has transcended its origins. It is no longer the name of a suspect. It is a symbol. It represents the fantasy of the clean getaway, the dream of sticking it to the man and vanishing without a trace. It speaks to a deep, rebellious nerve in the collective psyche, the desire to drop out of a system that feels increasingly rigid and inescapable. You see the most vivid manifestation of this transformation in a small, unassuming town in the heart of the suspected jump zone. You travel to Ariel, Washington, on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. Here you find the annual celebration of D.B. Cooper Days. This is your verifiable historical fact. It is not a solemn memorial of a crime, but a jubilant, almost reverent festival. You see men dressed in dark suits and sunglasses, a costume contest for the best Cooper look-alike. You hear live music playing songs written about the skyjacker. People share their personal theories over beers, their voices filled with a mixture of awe and conspiratorial excitement. The highlight of the event is a parachute demonstration, a symbolic reenactment of the legendary jump. A crime has become a cause for celebration. A federal felon has been canonized as a local folk hero. This is where the story truly becomes transformative. The public has taken the raw data of the crime of hijacking, a ransom, a disappearance, and has woven it into a narrative that serves a powerful psychological need. Cooper is the ultimate gray man. You are no longer in a specific place, but adrift in time, observing a slow, grinding process of institutional change. You are watching the Federal Bureau of Investigation, an organization built on certainty and results, as it wages a multi-decade war against a ghost. The initial response: Norakias, a flood, a brute force application of manpower. But floods recede, and what was left was a cold, quiet, and deeply frustrating waiting game. You are witnessing the slow, painful evolution of an agency forced to adapt its very identity in the face of a perfect, taunting failure. The 1980s and 1990s were the long winter of the investigation. The case became a repository of folklore and crank calls. The primary tactic was passive monitoring, a vast, silent web of serial numbers that caught nothing. The agency was waiting for a mistake that never came. Then, as the new millennium dawned, a new kind of hope emerged, born from the laboratory. The agency, once defined by G-men with guns, now turned to scientists in white coats. This is where you find the verifiable historical fact that defines the final phase of the hunt. In the mid-2000s, leveraging the revolutionary power of molecular biology, the FBI attempted to extract a full DNA profile from the saliva residues on the stamps and envelope of a letter believed to have been sent by Cooper, as well as from the back of the infamous clip-on tie. This was the ultimate gambit, the application of 21st century science to a 20th century crime. It was a belief that even if the man had vanished, his biological signature, his irrefutable essence, had been left behind. The result was the final, crushing disappointment. The lab was able to develop a partial DNA profile, but it was not complete enough to be entered into the national database for a definitive match. It could be used to exclude suspects. You have exhausted the physical world. You have sifted through the forensic dust, navigated the labyrinth of suspect files, and listened to the phantom signals in the machine. You are left staring into the void where the man used to be, and you realize you have been asking the wrong questions. The entire investigation, from the moment the plane landed in Reno, has been predicated on a single, unwavering assumption that the motive was the money. Every theory, every search grid, every line of inquiry has radiated outward from that central gravitational point. The goal was to get rich and get away. But now, you force yourself to jettison that assumption. You let it drift away and watch the entire constellation of facts realign into a new, terrifying pattern. What if the money was never the point? What if the ransom was a MacGuffin, a brilliant piece of misdirection designed to give the crime a motive the public and the police could understand? While the true purpose was something far more abstract and sinister, you are no longer looking for a thief. You are looking for a messenger, and you must now try to understand the message. Your search for this hidden motive leads you to the most mundane and yet most powerful clue of all: the calendar. The verifiable historical fact is that the hijacking of Flight 305 took place on November 24, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. You let the significance of that timing wash over you. Thanksgiving is the most American of holidays, a national ritual of gratitude, family, and faith in the country's foundational myths of bounty and security. On the eve of this day, the entire nation is in a state of collective quiet, a gentle hum of anticipation. Families are gathering. The country is preparing to give thanks for its stability and prosperity. He doesn't commit a street-level crime, seizes a symbol of modern progress, a jetliner, and holds a corporation and the federal government hostage. Choosing the day before Thanksgiving is not a coincidence. It is a statement. It is a deliberate, surgical strike against the nation's psychological sense of well-being. He is sending a message: you are not safe. Your systems are fragile. Your security is an illusion. Even now, as you prepare to celebrate your strength, a single, quiet man can bring your world to a halt. This act of symbolic disruption aligns perfectly with a bizarre and potent doctrine you've uncovered in the history of revolutionary and esoteric groups: the concept of propaganda by the deed. Anarchist thinkers in clandestine cells of the 19th and 20th centuries believed that the most powerful way to effect change was not through words, but through a single, spectacular, symbolic act of violence or defiance. The act itself, is the propaganda. It is designed to be a spark that awakens the public consciousness, to demonstrate the vulnerability of the state, and to inspire others to question authority. It is a form of political theater where the message is burned directly into the public imagination. More esoteric versions of this doctrine treat it as a form of reality hacking, a ritual designed to introduce a new idea virus into the collective mind. You now see the hijacking through this lens. It wasn't a robbery. It was a carefully staged play. The ransom was simply the plot device that set the stage. The real goal was the performance, the demonstration of a single individual's power over the system. By demanding money, Cooper gave the authorities a motive they could process, ensuring they would react in a predictable way. He used their own logic against them, making them focus on the cash while he executed the real mission, the symbolic act of disappearing. You have explored the mind of the man, the guts of the machine, the ghost in the folklore, and the symbol in the act. You have considered every angle of meticulous planning and flawless execution. But now, you must turn your attention to the one element that no plan, no matter how brilliant, can ever fully control: chance. You must confront the unsettling possibility that the enduring mystery of D.B. Cooper is not the product of a masterfully designed labyrinth, but the accidental result of a series of lucky breaks and catastrophic human errors. You are no longer looking for a mastermind. You are looking for a crack in the system where a man simply fell through. The entire operation, from beginning to end, is a tightrope walk over a chasm of failure, and at every step, fortune seemed to favor the ghost. Consider the first and most critical failure, the initial response on the ground in Seattle. The verifiable historical fact is that while Cooper was calmly negotiating from 30,000 feet, the FBI on the ground was scrambling. In their haste to procure the ransom and the parachutes, a crucial error was made. They sourced the reserve parachutes from a local skydiving school, but these parachutes were not standard military-issue chutes. They were training chutes, and they had been sewn shut. They were completely non-functional dummies, used only for classroom demonstrations. You let the absurdity of this detail sink in. The FBI, the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world, in the middle of a high-stakes hijacking, handed the perpetrator to parachutes that were nothing more than props. Cooper, in his own moment of haste or oversight, chose one of these dummy chutes as his reserve. If his primary parachute had failed for any reason, and the chances of malfunction in a stormy, high-speed jump were significant, he would have pulled the cord on his backup and plummeted to his death, holding a useless bag of cloth. The entire legend, the decades of mystery, hung by the single, fragile thread of his primary chute's integrity. He was one faulty ripcord away from being just another forgotten, failed criminal. This single error opens a Pandora's box of other potential blunders. What about the search? The Noryok task force was massive, but it was also a chaotic jumble of different agencies with competing jurisdictions and protocols. Soldiers, FBI agents, and local sheriffs were all operating in the same brutal terrain. Communications were poor. Search grids overlapped or had gaps. It was a perfect storm of bureaucratic inefficiency. Did a search team walk right past his body or his parachute, missing it by a few feet in the dense undergrowth? Did a crucial piece of evidence get picked up by a civilian and kept as a souvenir, never reported to the authorities? The fog of war was thick, and in that fog a man, or the evidence of his fate, could easily have been lost forever. This chain of errors and lucky breaks brings to mind a bizarre and deeply cynical concept from the fringes of conspiratorial thought, not from a historical organization, but from a modern, chaotic one: the doctrine of incompetence, often associated with online chaos magic groups and Discordianism. This doctrine posits that major historical events are not the result of brilliant plans by secret cabals, but the accident. You pull back from the granular details of the case of the parachutes, the suspects, the money, and allow your perspective to widen. You are no longer looking at the event in isolation. You are now a historian, placing the hijacking within the vast, turbulent landscape of its time. To understand the crime, you must first understand the world that gave birth to it. You must examine the economic and social climate of 1971, a year that sits at a crucial, painful turning point in American history. The hijacking was not just an event, it was a symptom of a nation in the grip of a fever. The early 1970s were a period of profound disillusionment. The optimism of the post-war boom was dead. The country was mired in the Vietnam War, an unwinnable conflict that was tearing the nation apart, creating a deep and bitter divide between the government and its people. Trust in authority was at an all-time low. At the same time, the economy was beginning to falter. This is where you find your verifiable historical fact. In August of 1971, just 3 months before the hijacking, President Richard Nixon implemented a series of radical economic measures known as the Nixon shock. He unilaterally canceled the direct international convertibility of the US dollar to gold, effectively ending the Bretton Woods system that had governed international finance since World War II. He also imposed a 90-day freeze on wages and prices to combat rising inflation. To the average American, the Nixon shock was a deeply unsettling event. It was a signal that the economic rules they had lived by their entire lives had suddenly changed. The dollar in their pocket, once a symbol of solid gold-backed stability, now felt abstract and untethered. The value of their savings was uncertain. The future felt precarious. There was a pervasive sense of economic anxiety, a feeling that the system was rigged and that the rug was about to be pulled out from under the common man. It was a climate of quiet desperation, where the American dream was beginning to look like a lie. Into this climate of anxiety and distrust steps a man in a business suit who demands $200,000 in cash. His act, when viewed through this economic lens, becomes something more than a simple robbery. It is a powerful piece of social commentary. He is not just taking money, he is taking back a piece of the value that people felt was being stolen from them by inflation and government policy. He demands his payment in negotiable American currency, physical, tangible bills, not the abstract numbers of a bank account. It is a symbolic rejection of the increasingly complex and untrustworthy financial system. He is turning the abstract fears of a nation into a concrete, dramatic act. This is where you encounter a strange and resonant concept from the world of fringe economic theorists and historical dissident groups. The idea of financial jujitsu. It's a principle where an individual or a small group uses the momentum and complexity of a large financial system against itself. Like a martial artist using an opponent's weight to throw them, a practitioner of financial jujitsu finds a loophole, a pressure point in the system, and applies a small amount of force to create a disproportionately large effect. They don't try to fight the system head-on. They exploit its own rules and assumptions to achieve their goal. D.B. Cooper's hijacking is a perfect example of financial jujitsu. He used the airline's own procedures, the FBI's own protocols, and the banking system's own currency against them. You have followed every thread, explored every theory, and peered into every shadow. You've been a detective, a psychologist, a cryptographer, a historian, and a scientist. Now, you must become a philosopher. The journey is no longer about finding the man. It is about finding yourself within the mystery. You must turn the camera around and examine the lens through which you have been viewing this entire saga. The final and most elusive subject of this investigation is not D.B. Cooper. It is you, the listener, the observer, the one who has journeyed this far into the labyrinth. Your position is a precarious one. You are standing at a crossroads with 3 paths leading away from it. The first path is belief. It is a well-trodden road, paved with the romance of the folk hero. To walk this path is to accept the legend. You believe Cooper was a brilliant mastermind, a former Special Forces operative, or a secret agent, a man with a plan who executed it flawlessly. He survived the jump, landed safely, and disappeared into a new life, a ghost enjoying his freedom. You believe he outsmarted the system, and you find a certain satisfaction, even inspiration, in that victory. The discovery of the money at Tenenbaum was a deliberate plant, the final clever move in a game he won. This path is comforting. It provides a neat, compelling narrative with a hero. However flawed and a clear resolution, the man got away. The second path is skepticism. This road is colder, harder, and paved with the sharp stones of logic and probability. To walk this path is to trust the data and reject the myth. You believe Cooper was, at best, a clever amateur, and at worst, a desperate fool who got lucky for a few hours. The verifiable historical fact that guides you is the brutal reality of the jump itself. At night, into a freezing storm with a non-steerable parachute,
Over some of the most rugged terrain in North America.
the odds of survival were vanishingly small. You conclude that he died on impact, or shortly after from exposure. The money was never found because it, along with his body, was scattered and consumed by the wilderness. The bills at Tennebar were a fluke, the random deposit of a river over a decade. Denter. The mystery is not a sign of his genius, but a testament to the forest's ability to swallow a secret. This path is rational, but it is also a little sad. A story of audacity ending in a lonely, anonymous death. The third path is the most difficult and the least traveled. It is the middle ground, a winding, uncertain trail that cuts through the fog between the other two. To walk this path is to accept that you can't know, and to find meaning in that very uncertainty. You hold both possibilities in your mind at once. You acknowledge the brilliance of the plan and the staggering odds against its success. You see the evidence for his survival and the evidence for his death, and you refuse to let one cancel out the other. You understand that the power of the D.B. Cooper story lies not in the answer, but in the enduring, perfectly balanced nature of the question. This state of intellectual limbo reminds you of a bizarre and profound concept from quantum physics, repurposed by certain philosophical secret societies. The idea of the superposition of truth in quantum mechanics. A particle like an electron can exist in multiple states at once. It is both a wave and a particle until it is observed, at which point it collapses into a single state. These societies apply this principle to reality itself. They believe that for certain great mysteries, the truth exists in a state of superposition. D.B. Cooper is both alive and dead. He is both a genius and a fool. He is both a folk hero and a common criminal. The story remains in this powerful, unresolved state, and any attempt to solve it, to force it to collapse into a single answer, is an act of violence against the mystery itself. The goal is not to find the answer, but to learn to exist within the question. Choosing a path is a reflection of your own temperament, your own relationship with mystery, authority, and belief. Do you need a hero? Do you need a rational explanation? Or are you comfortable living in the gray spaces, in the unresolved tension of the unknown? This entire journey has been a mirror. The story of D.A.N. Cooper is a psychological test, and the answer: you stand at the crossroads of belief, skepticism, and mystery, but you find you are not alone. A new path has opened, one that didn't exist when this journey began. It is a path forged not from earth or stone, but from light and information. It is the path of the digital sleuth. When the FBI officially closed the active investigation in 2016, they did not bury the case. They unleashed it. They abdicated the throne, and into the power vacuum rushed a new kind of investigator, the crowd. You are no longer just a passive listener. You are now a node in a vast, decentralized brain, a global network of curious minds connected by the internet. Your investigation moves to the glowing screens of dedicated online communities, sprawling forums, and subreddits where the D.B. Cooper case is not a cold file, but a living, breathing obsession. This is your verifiable historical fact, the existence of these digital hubs, like the D.B. Cooper Forum, where thousands of amateur detectives collaborate 24/7. They share files, translate obscure documents, and debate the minutiae of the case with a passion that borders on religious fervor. They are a volunteer army, armed not with guns and badges, but with laptops and an unquenchable curiosity. Here you see the mystery being attacked with tools that were pure science fiction in 1971. Citizen scientists with access to university labs re-examine the forensic data from the tie, using isotopic analysis to trace the geographic origins of the pollen and minerals, trying to draw a map of Cooper's life from microscopic dust. You watch as amateur geographers and meteorologists use modern GIS software and historical weather data to create new, more sophisticated models of the jump zone, arguing that a slight change in the wind speed assumption could shift the search grid by 50 miles. They cross-reference passenger lists with military service records, pilot licenses, and criminal databases on a scale the original investigators could only have dreamed of. They are using the brute force of collective data processing to look for a needle in a haystack the size of a continent. This phenomenon, this networked consciousness, focused on a single problem, feels like a bizarre modern evolution of a concept you've encountered before: the egregore. Historical secret societies believed they could create a collective thought form, autonomous psychic entity, through disciplined ritual and secrecy. What you are witnessing now is the birth of a digital egregore. It is not created in a hidden temple, but in the open, chaotic space of the internet. It is a swarm intelligence, a leaderless, self-organizing entity that relentlessly probes the mystery from a million different angles at once. It has no hierarchy, no budget, and no single point of failure. It is a new form of investigative power, one that is both brilliant and terrifyingly unpredictable. But as you navigate this digital landscape, you also see the dark side of the swarm. For every brilliant piece of analysis, there are 1,000 rabbit holes. Confirmation bias runs rampant. A person's resemblance to the composite sketch is treated as hard evidence. Elaborate theories are spun from a single, ambiguous sentence in a declassified file. The network is just as effective at amplifying noise as it is at finding signals. You realize that this new era of investigation has not necessarily brought the world closer to the truth. It has simply created a more complex and dazzling labyrinth. The mystery is now layered with so many theories, counter-theories, and pieces of evidence that it has become more impenetrable than ever. The digital egregore, in its relentless attempt to solve the puzzle, may be inadvertently making it unsolvable, burying the real clues under a mountain of digital speculation. But the real question remained: is this new wave of collective intelligence a revolutionary tool that will one day corner the ghost? Or is it just another more modern hall of mirrors reflecting our own desire for answers back at us with blinding complexity? You have explored every facet of the crime, the investigation, and the legend. Now, you must confront the final, most human question of all: what happened after? You force yourself to move beyond the moment of the jump, beyond the binary choice of life or death, and to imagine a future for this man. Whether he was a genius or a fool, a hero or a villain, if he survived, he had to wake up the next day, and the day after that. What does a life after D.B. Cooper look like? You are no longer investigating a mystery. You are writing a ghost story in reverse, trying to imagine how a phantom becomes a man again. Let's walk down the path of survival. Imagine the immediate aftermath. He lands, not gracefully, but brutally. He is battered, bruised, and freezing. The money bag is a dead weight. His first hours and days are a desperate, primal struggle for survival against the elements. This is not the clean getaway of the movies. It is a raw, terrifying fight against a wilderness that wants him dead. This scenario leads you to the verifiable, historical fact that most survival experts agree upon. His greatest challenge was not the jump, but the golden hour after landing. Without shelter, without fire, in wet clothes, in near-freezing temperatures, hypothermia would have set in within an hour. His survival depended on an immediate, almost miraculous combination of skill, luck, and preparation. Did he have a pre-stashed survival kit? Did he have an accomplice waiting nearby? The odds are slim, but not zero. If he survives the wilderness, his next challenge is reintegration. He cannot simply walk into a bank and deposit a bag full of sequentially numbered bills. He cannot apply for a job or a passport using his own name. He has become a ghost, and he must learn to live like one. You imagine him living on the fringes, a shadow in the cash economy. He might have become a drifter, moving from town to town, taking odd jobs, never staying in one place long enough to raise suspicion. He would be a man without a past, his identity a carefully constructed fiction. Every interaction, every relationship would be a performance. He could never fully relax, never fully trust anyone. The freedom he gained would be a strange kind of prison, a life sentence of looking over his shoulder. This is where your mind turns to a bizarre and poignant concept from the lore of certain hidden societies: the idea of the exile S-mark. In their texts, they describe a ritual where a member who has committed a grave offense or one who has chosen to leave the order is not killed, but is instead marked in a way that is invisible to outsiders, but instantly recognizable to other members. This mark serves as a permanent brand of exile. The marked individual is forever cut off, unable to seek help or solace from the only community they ever knew. They are condemned to a life of absolute solitude. You wonder if Cooper, if he was part of such an organization, carried an exile's mark. Perhaps his crime was not sanctioned. Perhaps he went rogue. In this scenario, his survival would be the most profound kind of punishment. He would be a man hunted not just by the FBI, but by the very people who trained him. He would be trapped between two worlds belonging to neither. His life after the jump would be a lonely, paranoid existence, a constant flight from shadows on both sides of the law. He would be the ultimate displaced person, a man without a country, a tribe, or a name. Or perhaps there is a third possibility, one that is quieter and sadder. He survives the jump. He makes his way out of the woods, and he tries to disappear into a normal life, changes his name, moves to a new city, gets a mundane job. He marries, has children, he becomes a pillar of his community, a man known for his quiet reliability. But every day he lives with the secret, a ticking time bomb in the heart of his family. He watches the news reports on the anniversary of the hijacking, a strange, cold feeling in his chest. He sees the composite sketch and feels a flicker of recognition for a man he used to be. His great, daring act of rebellion has become a quiet, private shame, a story he can never tell. His freedom is not a grand adventure, but a long, slow fade into obscurity. But the real question remained. If he survived, what was the greater punishment, a life spent forever on the run, or a life spent pretending to be an ordinary man haunted by the ghost of the extraordinary thing he once did? You have reached the edge of the map. You have followed every path, turned over every stone, and listened to every echo. Now you stand at the center of the labyrinth and are forced to confront the stark, uncomfortable truth. The mystery endures not because the clues are too few, but because they are too many, and they point in every direction at once. The story of D.B. Cooper is a perfect circle of questions, and every attempted answer only reinforces the shape of the void it surrounds. This final phase of your investigation is not about discovering new facts, but about taking a final, clear-eyed inventory of what remains. After all these years, fundamentally and perhaps permanently unknown, let's summarize the great, unbridgeable gaps in the narrative. The first is his true identity. This is the bedrock uncertainty. Was he a military veteran, an aerospace engineer, a career criminal, or a complete amateur? Was Dan Cooper a hint, a joke, or a random choice? The partial DNA profile is a tantalizing but ultimately useless ghost, unable to give the phantom a name, without a face, a history, a family, or a motive. He remains a blank slate, a composite sketch of a man who might never have existed as depicted. The suspect list is a graveyard of plausible but unproven theories. We know what he did, but we have no idea who he was. The second great unknown is his fate. This is the binary question upon which the entire legend balances, life or death. The brutal conditions of the jump argue powerfully for his death. The complete disappearance of the man and nearly all the money argues just as powerfully for his survival and a clean getaway. The discovery at Tennebar, the one solid piece of physical evidence found in the wild, serves only to deepen the ambiguity, supporting both theories with equal frustrating plausibility. He exists in a quantum state, a superposition of survival and demise, and every piece of evidence we find seems perfectly calibrated to keep him there. The third is the fate of the money. This is the practical, tangible mystery that runs parallel to the existential one. The fact that only $5,800 out of $200,000 has ever been found is your final verifiable historical fact of profound significance. Where is the rest? Is it buried in a forest, rotting into the soil? Is it at the bottom of a lake? Or was it successfully laundered, destroyed, or rendered irrelevant by an organization with its own financial system? The money is the anchor of the story. Its disappearance is as complete and baffling as the disappearance of the man himself. These three pillars of uncertainty, identity, fate, and money form an unbreakable tripod that supports the entire weight of the myth. To solve one, you must solve them all, and every line of inquiry ultimately leads back to one of the other two, creating a closed, self-sustaining loop of mystery. This perfect, self-sustaining quality of the mystery reminds you of a final, bizarre concept from the world of esoterica. The idea of a hypersigil, or a story-form god. This is an advanced chaos magic technique where a practitioner creates not just a symbol, but an entire narrative, a story, with characters, a plot, and an unresolved question. The story is then launched into the collective consciousness. The energy generated by everyone who engages with the story, the investigators, reporters, the amateur sleuths, The people who attend the festivals, all of that intellectual and emotional energy is what feeds the sigil and fuels its original intent. The mystery is not a problem to be solved. It is an engine designed to generate a specific kind of energy. What if the D.B. Cooper case is a hypersigil? What if the entire event was constructed with these specific, unresolvable ambiguities built into its DNA? The purpose was not to get away with the money, but to create a permanent, self-sustaining mystery. A story that would be told and retold for generations, constantly generating fascination, debate, and doubt. The lack of an answer is not a failure of the investigation. It is the sign of the operation's perfect success. The mystery itself is the final product. We, in our relentless quest for answers, are the ones who keep the engine running, who keep the ghost alive. But the real question remained. Are we on the verge of finally solving a 50-year-old crime? Or are we all just unwitting participants in a much older and more profound ritual, forever feeding a story that was designed never to end? You have chased the ghost through the storm, through the archives, through the very fabric of folklore. You have weighed the evidence of science against the whispers of secret societies. You have seen the man as a genius, a fool, a hero, and a phantom. Now, at the end of it all, you let the theories fall away, like static from a failing radio transmission. And what remains is not a puzzle, but a human encounter. You are back on the plane, in the quiet, pressurized hum of the cabin, seeing the man not through the lens of an investigator, but through the eyes of the person who knew him best, the flight attendant, Tina Mucklow. This is the final, and perhaps most important, verifiable historical fact of the case. Mucklow, who spent the most time with Cooper, described him consistently not as a monster, but as a gentleman. He was calm, polite, and considerate. He was not cruel, she said. He was a man who ordered a bourbon and paid for it. He was a man who seemed to want to cause as little distress as possible while committing an act of profound disruption. In this simple, human interaction lies the deepest paradox of the entire story. The legend is built on his audacity, but the primary witness account is of his quiet humanity. This is where the story ceases to be about a hijacking and becomes about a performance, a final public act. You are reminded of a strange and poignant tradition from the lore of certain medieval artisan guilds, secret societies of craftsmen and artists. They spoke of the last masterpiece. An old master, at the peak of his skill, would pour all of his life's knowledge and soul into one final perfect work, but he would not sign it. He would release it anonymously into the world, and then he would disappear, retiring into obscurity, his identity forever separated from his creation. The act was not for fame or fortune. It was a pure, personal statement, a final, perfect expression of a lifetime of skill. The work itself was the signature. You look at D.B. Cooper through this lens, and the entire event is transfigured. Was the hijacking his last masterpiece? The calm demeanor, the precise demands, the psychological control, the flawless disappearance, was this the work of a master craftsman of crime, a man executing his final, perfect design? In this light, his politeness to Tina Mucklow is not a contradiction. It is a crucial part of the art. It is the texture, the fine detail that elevates the work from a crude act of violence into something more complex and resonant. He is not just stealing money, he is crafting an experience, a memory, a story. He is the artist, and the lives he touches are his canvas. His disappearance is not just an escape, it is the final, necessary act of separating the artist from the art, by vanishing. He ensures that the work, the mystery, will stand on its own, forever unburdened by the messy details of a creator's life. It will be contemplated, debated, and analyzed on its own terms. He has achieved a form of immortality, not as a man, but as a question. And so, you let the theories fall away like autumn leaves settling on the forest floor, and what remains is not the roar of a jet engine, but the quiet hum of a question that has become a part of you. The forest has grown over the search grids. The money has long since returned to the earth or to the void. And the men who chase the ghost are now ghosts themselves. The mystery is no longer a monster in the dark to be hunted. It has become a quiet companion on a starlit night, a story to be told when the world feels too certain, too small. The search is over, not because the mystery is solved, but because you realize it was never meant to be. The case is closed. The files are gathering dust. You can dim the lights now. The tension is gone, replaced by a strange and peaceful stillness. He is gone. The money is gone. But the story is now yours.